This happened about 20 years ago when I was in my early 20s. I still think about it more than I probably should. I was living in Alaska at the time in a small town where nothing much happened. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning and I was driving home from a friend's place. I didn't have a driver's license back then and the car wasn't insured. I was carrying a pistol and there was a good chance I had drugs on me too. Because of all that, I avoided highways at night if I could. Back roads meant a lower chance of getting pulled over by a cop. That night I took a loop road that cut through farms and a couple of small subdivisions. It was late, no moon, no streetlights, just darkness and my headlights. About halfway through the loop there was a sharp 90-degree turn. I slowed down to maybe 15 miles an hour and eased around it. As soon as the road straightened, my headlights hit something in the middle of the road. It was a red radio flyer wagon tipped on its side. I stopped the car. For a second I thought it had fallen out of someone's truck. Then I saw what it was around. Small clothes, a shirt, pants, and socks. They were scattered across the road and into the ditch like they'd been dumped or dragged. The clothes looked like they belonged to a kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old. On the other side of the ditch was a narrow trail leading into the woods. I just sat there with the engine running, staring at it. My first thought was that a kid had been hurt or wandered off, or worse. I kept thinking that if this were real, if there really was a kid involved, I just couldn't leave. I grabbed my pistol from the seat and got out of the car. I walked to the edge of the road and looked down into the ditch. The clothes led straight towards the trail. The woods beyond it were solid black. My headlights didn't reach far enough to help. I stood there for a long time, long enough that my arms started to feel tense. The whole thing felt staged. I had this strong sense that someone was just past the tree line, waiting to see what I would do. I couldn't hear anything, but I felt it anyways. Even with the gun in my hand, I didn't feel safe stepping off the road. Eventually, I backed away, got back in my car, and locked the doors. I drove around the wagon and didn't look back. I never reported it, and when I went back a few days later, I didn't see any clothes or wagons, even in the ditch. I don't know where the wagon came from or who put it there. I don't know if there was ever a kid involved at all. The only thing I know is that if I had followed those clothes into the woods, I don't think I would have come back. January 3rd, 2016 is a date I remember without trying. I was hunting behind my house north of Fort Bennett, Alaska. I was primarily hunting for elk, but would really shoot anything if I had the chance, including deer and bear. It was basically right out in my backyard, so I normally hunted alone, which wasn't unusual for me, and lots of Alaskans do it. That morning it was snowing, the steady kind that never really stopped. I walked out before noon with my rifle, moving slowly through the trees. Elk pass through that area every winter. I'd seen tracks the day before, fresh ones, so I decided to wait instead of walking. I found a snow buildup near a line of pines and dug myself in. I packed snow around my legs and waist to hide my scent and break my outline. Then I waited. Hours passed and the cold settled in, but I was used to it. No sign of elk or anything else yet, just snow and trees and the sound of my own breathing. I slowly scanned the woods. Everything looked the same until I caught movement near a pine tree about 50 yards out. Something moved fast, then stopped. I lifted my rifle and looked through the scope. I thought it might be a wolf or a bear moving wrong because of the snow. I waited. Something stepped out from behind a tree. I saw fur. That was enough for me. I adjusted my aim and pulled the trigger. Instead of dropping, it screamed. The sound wasn't like any animal I've heard. It was loud and sharp and deep, like it came from inside the ground. It echoed through the trees and hit me in the chest. I flinched hard and almost dropped the rifle. Then it stood fully upright. It was on 2 legs, tall, and it moved fast. It turned towards me, and I could feel it locked onto me. I pulled myself out of the snow and ran. My house wasn't far, but it felt like miles. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the brush, not slowing down. At one point, I decided to hit the deck and spun around, raising my rifle to fire another shot since it was gaining on me. It was coming out of the trees, and I fired my gun. I have no idea if I even hit it or not, but it slowed down a little either from being hit or hearing another bullet ring out. It screamed again, shorter this time, and turned away. I fired once more as it ran. While I had fired those last 2 shots, though, I had been briefly able to see its face. Its face was pale, almost white, and its eyes were white too, no color at all. Its mouth was open, and its teeth were long and thin, like needles. When it disappeared into the trees, I didn't go after it. I went inside, locked the door, and waited, watching the woods for a long time. I tried to figure out what I had just seen, and my best guess was that it was a Wendigo, but I don't really know. I still hunt and live out there on that property, but I've never gone back to that clearing where I was that day or anywhere near it. I know it's still out there, and I don't want to remind it of me. I will never return to that clearing again. This story happened 7 or 8 years ago. I was a single mom living on an island in southeast Alaska. There are only 26 miles of roads on the island, so it's a small place. It was a Friday night. My kid and I were scheduled to fly out of town for a long weekend in Seattle. So I worked all day, picked up the kid, and headed to the airport. Our flight to Seattle was canceled, so we rescheduled the first trip in the morning and headed home at about 8:30 p.m. As a side note, I wasn't a fan of cell phones and did not have one yet. After this incident, I got a cell phone. We lived about 14 miles north of town. I was tired and frustrated about our canceled flight, so I was probably driving a little faster than normal. About 3 miles from home, I came up behind a dark-colored pickup truck. The truck was going slower than I was, so I slowed down, but still got a little close to the truck's bumper. I tried to pass the truck, but realized I was in a no-pass zone. The driver evidently felt I had tailgated too closely, because they slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. People occasionally do this since we only have one main road on the island. I hit the gas, pulled around the truck, and headed home. Immediately, the truck sped up and moved right up to my back bumper. I started thinking, okay, you're angry that I tailgated you. Message received. The truck did not back off. The driver turned off their headlights so I could no longer see how close they were. I increased my speed a little, hoping to get rid of this person. Then, all of a sudden, the headlights came back on, and the truck was just inches from my car. At this point, my preteen daughter started to get a little worried. She was turned in her seat looking out the back window. It was very dark with no streetlights, so we could not see anyone in the truck, which made it even creepier. The truck turned off and on their headlights several more times. Each time the lights came back on, the truck would be right on my tail. We got close to our turn off the main road into our residential neighborhood. I signaled and hoped that the truck would keep going straight. I turned, and the truck turned. Our street was about 3 blocks away, but I did not want to turn down my dark road with this angry truck following me. So I didn't turn down our street, but kept driving straight while trying to reassure my daughter that everything was okay. Less than a mile from my house was a large elementary school with basketball courts, running track, hiking trails, and a big playground. The school's driveway and parking lot were open until 10 p.m. for students and neighbors to use. I decided to drive directly to the school because there were often people there, even at 8:30 at night. I drove up to the driveway and into the parking lot of the school. There were 3 or 4 cars parked, but I didn't see any people outside. I parked between cars directly under a streetlight. The truck followed us up the driveway but didn't enter the parking lot. The truck stayed in the middle of the driveway just at the entrance of the parking lot. It was as if the driver was blocking the driveway with their truck. The driver turned off their headlights and waited in their vehicle. We waited for the truck to leave or someone to come out of the school. About 15 minutes later, the truck turned on their headlights, backed up, and drove down the school's driveway towards the main road. We were relieved, but decided to wait another 5 to 10 minutes just to be sure. We were tired and hadn't even eaten dinner yet, so eventually I started the car and decided to leave the school parking lot. It was only a few blocks from home. As we got to the end of the school driveway, I turned right towards home. There were no other cars on that street that I could see. As soon as my car made the turn, bright headlights turned on directly behind us. The truck had not left. The driver had hidden behind the driveway's gate, turned off the headlights, and waited for us. As soon as our car pulled out onto the highway, the driver turned on their headlights and high beams and rushed right up to my back bumper. To be truthful, this freaked me out. I don't get scared easily, but having that truck come right up at us with its bright white headlights in the very dark, deserted street was enough to get my adrenaline pumping. I couldn't keep driving around the neighborhood all night with the truck. This was rural Alaska, so there weren't many well-lit places with people hanging around. The only convenience store on that end of the island had already closed. Then I remembered the wonderful piece of advice that I'd got about driving to a fire or police station if you're being followed. The Alaska State Troopers have their headquarters along the main road back towards town, so I headed there. The troopers have cameras that cover their entire property, so I knew if we could make it to their parking lot, I could honk and be seen by the dispatcher or any officers inside the building. The truck followed us all the way to the troopers' headquarters, which was about 7 or 8 miles. When the driver saw me pull into the troopers' parking lot, he or she turned around and drove back the way they had come. I went inside the station and reported what happened. We didn't get a license plate, but I wanted law enforcement to know there was a crazy truck terrorizing people. I think if I had gone directly home, the driver would have followed me. The driver took more than 30 minutes out of their Friday night to follow us and wait around. He or she must have been really angry. Who knows if things would have escalated to violence, but I'm very thankful that we didn't take any chances that night. We did catch the flight to Seattle the next morning and had a very relaxing long weekend. I'm a woman in my late 20s who has recently decided to take my personal safety more seriously. Last winter, my boyfriend got me my first handgun as a Valentine's Day present. The same one he had, as I already had a bunch of range time with it. My boyfriend and his kids and I live 20 minutes outside of town in a small cabin in Alaska. While we're tucked away mostly by trees, we do have neighbors around us in a small neighborhood. We know most of the people who live in our loop and are familiar with everyone who takes walks around it. One morning in mid-October, we found a pack of crumpled up and mostly empty cigarettes and a couple butts scattered in our driveway. We were slightly spooked because no one we know smokes and we hadn't had any visitors. I mentioned maybe our dog had dragged them out of a neighbor's trash can since he had run off a couple times recently, but my boyfriend was still suspicious of how they were arrayed. We got a little more weary but mostly shrugged it off. I was home alone a couple of mornings later and hanging around the house in my pajamas, drinking coffee and thinking about doing some house chores. My puppy had been outside for a while, and at one point him running past a window in my bedroom caught my eye. He was stopped in the driveway in a very strange low stance, staring. I looked towards where he was facing. There in the woods, 20 feet from my house and 10 feet from my dog, was a woman. The first thing I noticed was her hands. They were outstretched at her sides and adorned with orange latex gloves. Next, I noticed her long, straight black hair, black skinny jeans, and her t-shirt cut off at the shoulders. She was standing just behind a short pile of logs with her head tilted back and her eyes closed. My brain was frozen initially. She stood there making weird movements. I got my phone out and called my boyfriend twice in rapid succession with no answer. I pulled up my camera to document, but my hands were shaking as I noticed my dog inching closer to her in curiosity. He was doing a weird back and forward dance, still in a half-curious, half-cautious pose. My mind was racing on what to do. Should I be videoing, or should I confront her first? Should I grab my gun? What if she was armed? What kind of drugs was she on? I realized I didn't want my pup to go near the crazy lady and knew my boyfriend would be so disappointed if I confronted an iffy situation unarmed. I also didn't want to escalate the situation by waving a gun around. All these thoughts rushed through my mind in rapid succession during the few seconds while I fumbled for my camera. My pup moved even closer to her, only a couple feet away, and I made up my mind. I dropped my phone on the bed and grabbed my pistol from the top of the dresser, slid it out of its holster, and pointed it down and out with my finger firmly on the trigger. I walked up to the front door and pulled it open. I stepped halfway out onto the steps with my right hand with the gun concealed behind the door. I can't for the life of me remember if I called for my dog or confronted her first, but in between every sentence I said to her I called him back to me. The third time he listened, and I ushered him inside. I called out, "Ma'am, what are you doing?" She looked up at me mildly surprised and said kind of quietly, "Nothing." I stated, "Well, you're on my property and you're behaving very strangely." I was relieved to hear my voice was steady. She paused for a minute and said, "No, I'm going to Val's house." I asked her where Val's house was, as I was trying to get an idea of where she came from. She pointed at the house I was standing half outside of and said, "That's Val's house." I said very firmly, "No, this is my house." She responded with, "Okay, I'll leave." She started gathering objects from the ground, what looked like a red bandana, a dark sweater, and after a few seconds of watching her fumble, I realized she was putting her boots on. She stumbled through the woods towards the driveway, and I shut the door and ran for my phone. I got a video of her walking in wide zigzags down my driveway. Later watching the video, I picked up more details I hadn't noticed, like the fact that she was wearing nice pricey boots and had a full sleeve tattooed on her right arm. This was my first questionable situation since I started concealing and carrying, and I was super glad to know the safety training I'd pounded into my head stuck. We posted the video on our local group page, and one of our neighbors messaged us not long after, saying they'd found her clothes in their driveway and sent pictures. We never got any more info on who she was or who her friend Val was. I checked the woods multiple times and couldn't tell if she'd been sleeping there. I can't imagine my dog would have let her go unnoticed. I went through each shed and storage place on our property for signs of activity or anything missing, and it all looked normal, but we started locking up better after that. Me and 4 other friends were moose hunting in Alaska, as we do most years. This particular year we were 8 miles in, with no trail and no outside noise. Everything we had was on our backs. 3 tents about 15 feet apart in a loose triangle was our camping spot for the night. 2 tents had 2 people, and 1 guy slept alone. It was around day 8 of our trip. We were worn down from hiking all day, and sleep usually came fast. That night, though, my buddy and I both woke up in our tent at the same time. We just rolled over and looked at each other. He had the same look I did, wondering why we both woke up at the same time. About 10 seconds later, the rain started, and it turned into a sudden downpour. It was so loud it swallowed everything else. We figured maybe our bodies felt a pressure change or something, and that's why we woke up before the rain. We both turned back over to go to bed, and then through the rain we heard a voice. The voice was one of our friends, who shouted, "Hey, get out of here!" We both sat up. I yelled towards the other tents, asking if anyone was up. No answer. I yelled again and still heard nothing. At that point I was really creeped out. We started pulling on boots and jackets, fumbling with zippers and headlamps. After a few seconds, we heard the 2 guys in tent number 2 yell back that they were awake and asked what was going on. There was still nothing from the guy who was sleeping in the solo tent. We grabbed our rifles and stepped out into the rain. It had only been maybe a minute since we first woke up, but it felt longer. Mud was already forming around the tents. We called out to the solo guy by name. A few seconds passed. Then he yelled back, "Sorry, I'm good. I punched a bear." We all froze for a second, not sure if we heard him right. Once he came out of his tent, we saw his hand. It was bleeding pretty good. He said he'd been asleep when the side of his tent pushed in and touched his head. He half woke up and shoved it back, thinking it was wind. Then it pushed harder, and that's when he punched it. The tent lines were ripped out of the ground, and there were claw marks in the mud leading away, and clear bear tracks sinking deep into the wet soil. It was probably a young, curious black bear, but nonetheless, none of us slept the rest of that night.